All right. All right. So I think we could just start off. How do y'all feel? Good. All right. Awesome. Awesome. So, hey everyone, this session is called Decolonizing Work. Um, we have an amazing panel, and this is going to be very free form conversation. We invite everyone in the audience to just ask your questions, and we'll incorporate that into the discussion. We'll start off with just a short introduction from all the panelists. I can start off. So my name is Felipe Ventura. I'm an executive director here at Techqueria. I'm so happy that you all can join us and participate in this discussion.
Okay, I can go next. My name is Gabrielle Rejui. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior policy manager with Color of Change, but I'm here not representing Color of Change. I'm here in my personal capacity. I'll pass it to Marley.
And I'm Marley Pulido, Director of Worker Resources and Training at coworkers.org, but I'm also here representing myself.
Yeah, I should mention that I'm also representing myself. I'm not speaking for the org. This conversation may get a little candid, so want to cover my steps. So before we start off, I'd like to just do a brief land acknowledgement. Something that in this conversation about decolonization is super important. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're steering from. I'm in Richmond, California, and that's the Ohlone people. Marley is in Arlington, near Arlington, right? In Virginia. And the indigenous people there are the Powhatan, Monacan, and Cherokee. And Gabrielle is in New Jersey, and the indigenous people there are the Lenape. And we pay our respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. And we stand in solidarity with the indigenous people of this land and their struggle for recognition, reparations, and land rights. We also acknowledge that we're at a very historical moment, and we also stand in solidarity with those fighting for racial justice and unequivocally assert that Black Lives Matter. All right, so to start off this discussion on decolonizing work, I'd just like to throw out the question, like, what is decolonization for you all? Like, how does that manifest in your lives? How would you define it?
Okay, I keep waiting for Marley to go, and I think he's deferring to me. So I guess for me, decolonizing, I'm first generation American, and so a lot of professionalism is sort of passed down as like you need to assimilate, don't rock the boat, do whatever you can so that you can like make our sacrifice worth it, essentially. And so a lot of decolonizing for me has been pushing back on like what are the bounds, right? Like, obviously, if you want to be a doctor, you need to go to school and get your degree. But do doctors have to have straight hair? Do doctors have to use the Queen's English? Is it okay for them to sort of like relate with their patients and slip into more like casual conversational English? And so a lot of that has been a lot of work of like, okay, like, why should I speak in this way? Why should I wear my hair that way? Is it okay for me to wear colors to work? Or, is it okay for me or do I only have to wear black and navy and gray? So yeah, that's how I've been decolonizing work.
For me, it's kind of similar, but also a little different because as an immigrant, I feel like I have to decolonize myself here. I have to fight for me to not have to fit in all the time here in the US, but also when I go back home, and I'm from Cuba, like I have to also fight a different fight. Because as a colonized island, that space was not designed for me. And people in leadership don't look like me, and people in like fancy jobs don't look like me. So I feel like I'm always trying to fight for people to not put me in a box. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. For me, it's like So it comes into contrast with what colonization is and what colonization looks like in like first in the space that I occupy. So what is the history of colonization in the East Bay in California in the USA? And also as a person, like what do my family's histories, how just my families and where they're coming from have been colonized. So like my dad and his family is coming from the DR, which is where like colonization in the Americas started, in the island of like Hispaniola. And my mom's coming from Colombia, specifically like the Caribbean region. And that was like an area that was like the capital of the Spanish Empire for some time. So the history of colonization in my family's runs deep. And so partly it's like identifying the ways that colonization is happening and also unearthing what cultures exist that in my family's histories that dealt with that legacy, and also like what existed even before the Spanish and other empires colonized my families. So it's like an ongoing process, and it's not only like this discovery process, it's also very much for me like a political process of reclaiming both like agency and like standing in solidarity with people that are doing decolonization where I live, in this case like the Ohlone people. Because when we think of like indigenous people, there's this myth that they don't exist as a community and they're not alive, and that's very much not the case. They're alive and they're still fighting for their rights in their lands. So I think like originally this conversation was like entitled Decolonizing Your Career Growth. So and we're all here figuring out like how to advance in our careers and what that looks like. And so like specifically, how does decolonization show up in your workplace? Or how can it exist in your workplace?
Do you want to go?
And I'll throw it to Marley since he's so
Yeah.
together. No, I'll throw it to Marley first. Does he always go?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I feel like it shows up all the time, and I feel like especially during COVID, I have been trying to I've been trying to convince myself that yes, I am worthy of like being in like having the job I have, even if I'm not able to be as productive as they want me to be, because we are in a pandemic and like my mental health is not the same as it was a year ago. So I'm navigating this. I'm on this journey of trying to figure out like how productivity shows up at work, not how productivity shows up at work, how like the idea that we have to be productive controls like so many aspects of our lives. And I was talking to a friend earlier today about how like even in my personal space, when I'm hanging out with my friends, and I live in the DC area, so like the professional, the idea of a professional is like very strong in DC. And I was talking to this friend about how when I'm trying to schedule time to hang out with other friends, I feel like that meeting with my friends needs to be productive and needs to be efficient. And I'm like, no. If we don't have a schedule, if we don't have an agenda, and like if we don't have like an icebreaker, I don't want to hang out with you because I need structure. And where I come from, things are a little bit more not relaxed, but like spontaneous. And I feel like, yeah, I feel like the idea of professionalism, it's a tool that like if we are in so-called professional settings, like people of color and Black people have to like navigate so you show up differently and fit in. but I'm out here trying not to fit in. So it's a struggle.
You put a different question in the chat than the one that you asked us, which is fine. But I like had a specific response to that one. Yeah. But I can't remember it. But yeah, I think definitely like just like riffing off of what Marley said, like it's a lot of like fighting imposter syndrome. That's what I wanted to talk about. And like celebrating what you've already done. Like my therapist is like really working with me to make sure that I celebrate when I like have wins. I think like a lot of us can relate to like kind of feeling like, well, there's, you know, the job's not done, so I can't celebrate. And like, when is a job ever done? You know, it, like you go to undergrad and it's like, okay, well now I have to do grad school. It's like you graduate from grad school. It's like, okay, now I have to do like the professional like exam for the license or whatever. And then that's done. It's like, okay, well, I'm not like 30 under 30 or 40 under 40. And it's just like, okay, well, you need to rest. You need to stop. You need to be like, this got done and celebrate it. And like, that's just not in the work cultures that I've been a part of. It's always felt patronizing. I don't know if that's like, again, imposter syndrome coming into play when they're like, oh my gosh, you did a great job. And I'm like, it wasn't perfect, you know?
Yeah.
Or like comparing myself to coworkers who've been there longer. And of course, they're going to have more monumental wins because they've been working at it longer. And just like sitting and being like, wow, like we did that. Like that was a really big thing and we got it done. Or it wasn't. Like, you know, there's a meme comparing like, it was a SpongeBob meme where it's like when like King Neptune had like a bunch of like Krabby Patties that he'd made and like SpongeBob had the one. And then it was just like, you know, somebody did something really amazing versus someone who like made it through the day after having a breakdown. And it's like, no, that's still really like, you made it to the end of the day. That's like an accomplishment and like should be celebrated. And I think sometimes that's like a struggle that I definitely am working through.
So we're mentioning like feeling satisfied with what we're capable of doing, especially during these difficult times when there's like a lot of stress, and also making the decision that like, okay, I actually don't want to fit in. I want to show up in a different way. Now that I've made this decision, how do I make it work in my workplace? And I think that's like an interesting like departure point for the conversation. So like once we've made that decision, like, hey, I don't want to fit in, that kind of like means like I've identified this culture in my workplace and the values, and I've made the decision that a number of these are not aligned with myself. So when we get to that point, like, what do we do from there? And I think it starts with the individual, but then it branches out to more than just like us. It's like we get to a point where we actually like need community, and we need like either other coworkers, members of our network, family. What does that look like to y'all? Like the community aspect of once the decision of not fitting in is made.
Do you want to go? I can go.
Yeah, you started. Go ahead.
It's super important, and God, like for me, I feel like I am in a position right now where I'm able to say, I want to be part of this, or I do not want to be a part of this, because I know myself, and like before, I don't know, not before applying for a job. When applying for a job, and if I'm lucky enough to be interviewed, or if I'm trying to be a part of, I don't know, a new project or something, I first ask about the culture. Is this an individualistic space, or are we trying to be a community? Because I know that I do not thrive in individualistic spaces. That's not me. Like I love celebrating wins, and I love celebrating wins in community. I can do it by myself. That's not who I am. So that's for me. That's a line I draw. but also something else that I think about is diversity. Uh, I feel like I had my fair share of spaces where I was the only non-white person in the room, and I don't want to do it anymore. It's exhausting. I don't want to be code switching all the time because it has a lot of brain power. And like I have an accent. I'm an immigrant. I'm a Afro Latino. Like I want to be. I want to be in spaces where my identity is celebrated, and I'm not just the other person. And I just don't have to, water down my identity constantly. So I'm able to be successful at work. And also something else that I think a lot about, and I think this is it might be decolonization or not. Actually, I think it is, and it's respect for personal time. And I feel like employers many times think they have, unlimited access to your time, and I just can't. I love my personal space, even if it's to just take a nap in the middle of the day.
No, I definitely want a plus one, like just having control of your time. When I started working after school, I was just like, 9 to 5, if there's an emergency or there's a big project coming up, then, we're working a little longer, but I'm not checking my email after I leave the office. I'm not checking my email on the weekends. And like, not everybody has that luxury, but I was just like, if I start my career and checking my email 24/7, I'm never going to stop. And I think especially as like a public interest lawyer versus my friends who were at firms, they were expected to do that. Like, they would wake up at 5 a.m. to check their emails to see if they had an assignment done. And that's not the vibes that I want to like surround myself with. I think the important thing too, as an advocate, having that community is, that you'll have people who have your back if you need to rock the boat. So if you're in a coalition meeting and someone says something just absolutely wild, that if, you're not the only person in the room, like Marley said, that's like really exhausting. Like if it's not me, it's going to be so-and-so. And if so-and-so says something, then I'll back them up. And I think that's just so revolutionary. Like being the only one and always feeling the need to like constantly check someone, and maybe not even check someone, but like represent your community or, challenge someone's viewpoint. It's exhausting, and knowing that you have a community that is in the room, so that way you feel that support, but also after the meeting, having that text thread to like debrief the meeting is like really healing as well.
So you mentioned like a coalition group, and so this is like a group that has formed at work for a particular purpose or identity, or what exactly is that in your experience, Gabrielle?
Yeah, so it's coalitions are like groups, and in my experience, it's been groups that come together to advocate for a specific like policy goal. So like there are like worker privacy coalitions that I'm a part of. There are like consumer privacy coalitions that I'm a part of. And for the most part, there's been a lot of work to push them to think about like how does civil rights fit into like what we're talking about, because these are like predominantly white spaces, and they're not thinking about what are the impacts on immigrant communities, what are the impacts on communities living on low income, communities of color. So yeah.
So I'm interested in talking about these like more formal groups, and also like what happens when we actually can't have those groups, like ways of organizing informally within the workplace and even like outside of the workplace that will help the work that we do. Because like frequently in maybe coalition groups or employees resource groups or affinity groups, whatever you want to call it, company supported groups, we frequently run into the issue of the goals being co-opted by the company itself. And so you often see the goals be things that the company wants instead of the worker group itself. And we have a couple of questions that maybe can fit into this. One by Ariel is like, how do you advocate for yourself, others, to challenge your team in a way that doesn't make you the controversial one in your workplace?
I can talk about it because that's what I do at work, but that's also my passion. Let me see how I say this. So
so before that question's answered, I want to touch a little bit upon how to prevent co-opting in an ERG or an affinity group. So I've had the experience of like forming 2 different groups at my previous workplaces, and one thing that has really helped is to have like a group of just rank and file workers. So just like people that don't have any firing or hiring capacity. And that has helped a lot in terms of like getting the type of discussions going. Because frequently a lot of the problems that happen with just like rank and file workers are issues with management. And if management is in the space, then it may be really hard to have the type of discussions about how to transform the workplace that we would want to have. So that's one point that I wanted to bring up.
Yeah. And the thing is that you gotta do this, like if you want.
But to Ariel's points, does anyone have any thoughts on like how to avoid being like, how to advocate for yourself and others and challenge like the team to do more to create like a healthy work environment without being singled out or like being seen as the controversial worker?
Hear me? I think my mic was muted.
I think Marley maybe.
Can you hear me?
Frozen.
Okay. So a lot of this, like, you don't want to be fired when you're trying to,
Sorry, having some technical difficulties.
You good, Felipe? Can you hear us? Yeah.
Marley, can you hear us? Okay.
I can go, and if Felipe can't hear me, I can tell him later. But like, you don't want to be fired when you're trying to affect change at work, because like we all have to pay rent, but also like a lot of the times I do like my job. Some other times I don't, but if I do, like I try to make changes. I try to be strategic about making changes so I can stay in that place. So a lot of the work you just have to do it in private. Just reach out to your coworkers one-on-one and try to build those relationships and talk to people that you trust. Because then you're just gonna fail. So yeah, that's the basic. But like a lot of it is also thinking about like, do you understand how your company works? Do you know, I don't know, do you have resources? Do you know the people? Is there anybody who can help you? So yeah, let me see if we can help Felipe come back in.
So about that, I think my advice would just be don't be afraid of being seen as a controversial one or like the confrontational one. I think especially like we have to take into account like race and gender with these conversations, because if you are a woman and you are, you know, raising these issues, there's a way that you're going to be perceived. If you are a woman of color, especially if you're a darker skinned woman of color, you're going to be perceived as more aggressive, unfortunately. And so I would just say, like, you know, you have to be strategic in how, like Marley said, you need to be strategic in the ways that you approach these issues, but like, don't like hold your tongue because you're afraid of that. I mean, it's really frustrating to say, and it's really frustrating to experience, but for sure you need to make the workplace work for you. Don't feel like you have to be quiet or docile or whatever, so that way you can get the things that you want done. Yeah, it's also easier said than done for sure. But I think also it's a way, like, you know, being labeled as controversial or like confrontational, yeah, it's a way to stop you from saying what needs to be said. And, you know, that's the importance of having community, even if it's not at your workplace. If you're like, if you have a sounding board that is a community that looks like you, they can let you know, like, no, actually you are kind of out of pocket. You need to like reel it in, or like, no, you are absolutely right and you should have said that. I think that's definitely the most important thing about like trying to make your workplace a better place.
I'm not representing my employer here, but I'm gonna drop a really good resource on talking to your coworkers about workplace issues. And the thing is that, like, especially right now with this entire movement fighting for, you know, Black lives and movement fighting for Black lives, we see how employers are trying to, you know, make little changes. So the idea of being the controversial one, I would just embrace it, and that's probably just me. But that would also like help. Yeah, I think it's important to embrace it and just like push your coworkers to do better, so you can push your company to do better.
Yeah, I mean, like the old saying of like you get more flies with honey than vinegar. Of course, you need to be strategic in how you do that, but don't. There's like sugarcoating it, and there's like, you know, trying to be like, you know, meet people where they are.
I think we had another question up here, and I'm trying to find it. How do we react when we hear a company describing their culture as feeling like a family?
I mean, if it's like your friends and like you all are friends, even then sometimes you need to draw a line. My experience with that is kind of like, you know, you're not gonna sabotage your family, right? Like, you know, that's my concern with those types of language. I think it's tricky, especially because we come from cultures where, you know, you don't have to be related by blood to be family. But we need to be careful of also the ways that it can be used to sort of guilt you into not taking care of yourself first.
Yeah, so I have had so many experiences with my employer telling me you're part of the family, and they have fired me of the job when I was controversial. And me being controversial was me saying, you're not paying me enough. What are we gonna do about this? So yeah, no, I don't. We're not family. And if I want to be family, I get to decide that. Any other questions from folks while we hope Felipe gets in?
There is a question about, in your experiences, have you tried to put a certain time frame on achieving the formation of the coalition or groups? I think kind of taking what Felipe said into consideration about like, if you want this to be something that is, there's a danger, I should say, in, you know, the managers getting involved and sort of like their approval of a group or like a affinity group and things of that nature. So I think that's kind of that makes it tricky. I think if there's a commitment that your company has made about like, you know, we support communities of color, then that's probably the best time to ask for a time frame in place. So that way it's not just a PR statement that they put out and then they're not doing anything to follow up on the back end. But if it's, I mean, I've had a lot more, or my experience, I should say, has only been with informal groups that have come together. And so we haven't really waited on someone else to come in and give us the go ahead or provide resources for us. So I'm not the best person to say.
I have another question. Small actions to decolonize your workplace. For me, a lot of the times, like not a lot of the times, I'm trying to decolonize myself because I'm problematic because I exist in a problematic world. So I try to like deconstruct and like decolonize also myself. And when trying to do this, I usually think about my grandfather, who's someone who I trust, who's someone who's like extremely wise, and it's a person I look for. It's a person I follow blindly, and I always think about like what will my grandfather do, and I feel like that respect to my elders is also part of decolonizing myself, because they lived in a different world. They lived they live different challenges than the challenges I think I'm facing now. So respect your elders.
I guess another small action you can do to decolonize your workplace is pushing for I guess I was gonna say, like, you know, you could push for changes to the ways that success is being quantified at work, but also acknowledging the fact that some of us are not in HR and we shouldn't be doing HR's job. I remember being tapped for like a hiring process and felt like I'm not being paid to do this. Like I'm like the newest hire and I'm also like the only staff of color. And I don't feel like I should be put in this position. And so like trying to thread that needle of like, here's a conversation that we need to have about why are like they're threading the needle of like, this is a conversation we need to have as an organization. And then like, who is the person who's going to actually do that work? I think the small conversation is, hey, let's have a conversation about this. And the bigger action is actually like pushing for the actual policy that will come out because of that conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and on that, I also think that it's important for HR to do their job and for companies to pay someone to take care of like all these problems that companies have. But I think it's also, there's a lot of value in workers coming together and like brainstorming what kind of workplace do they want to be in, and also take that power from HR and just like flipping it and make it your own. But it's also not paid.
Yeah, I think another thing that I feel is something that I do that's decolonizing is when I'm asked to speak and I can't speak, I try to refer other like people of color, especially like Black women, to speak. I know a lot of times I'm the token on a lot of my panels and like not feeling the pressure to just take every speaking engagement because I'm like, there's only so many of us, but also helping that person do that work and just be like, hey, like, here's my friend that is also an expert on this topic. You should definitely reach out to them and see if they're available. like definitely lifting as you climb. I think that's another thing that you can do to decolonize. So like, are you mentoring someone? Are you making sure that your mentor is speaking to the people that they need to be speaking to? Yeah, it's a lot of like community building, and that's how I see decolonizing. It's just like, is your community eating? You know, are you knocking down barriers so that way your community can get to where they want to be?
Can you hear us now, Felipe? No, not yet. I love tech, but I also hate tech.
I guess kind of just going through some of the other questions in the chat. I think to Rachel's question about like what is controversial, it's a term that it's used when people want to use it, right? So like if you're not doing something that people like, then you're controversial, which is why it's kind of tricky. I mean, I have been rewarded for being controversial. I wrote a blog post. Well, I wrote a guide on how to build more inclusive tech policy organizations, and some people were like, "What do you mean we're creating violent spaces? Like, you know, we are not putting our hands on anyone. It's just like when you ask me questions about my hair, or like, you know, you make comments about, you know, my English, or like the fact that I speak, like my English is, you know, I'm articulate. You make comments like that's violence. And I mean, I was at an organization that thankfully supported that work. And so that's one way that I saw that I was rewarded. But you never know if you actually are going to be like rewarded. You know, you're stepping out and hoping that people are going to do the right thing.
I think I was rewarded. Like I felt like I was rewarded, but it was not supposed to be a reward. And like I was working at this very small organization, and it was like most of the community members, the people that we were serving, were like brown folks, indigenous folks, immigrant folks coming from Central America. And then the board of directors was all white people, white middle class, upper middle class sometimes, white folks from the suburbs. And the fact that they didn't see like the whiteness of the board as a problem, and that they didn't create any space for like folks from the community to actually have a say in the decisions that were being made about, you know, about the community. They didn't see it as a problem. So me coming and like being the controversial one and asking the hard questions, like we were able to get folks from the community to the board. But my mental health was a mess, because it was a lot. Like fighting all these structures, it's exhausting. It is exhausting. So build community, so it's not as exhausting, because it was just me. It's another question here. How do you navigate coworkers that share similar identities yet still prefer to side with a larger company? Oh goodness, I don't think I'm ready for this question. Look, it's difficult, you know? It's difficult.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I was at an organization where I had to find community at other orgs. And I was in a space where, you know, if there were two people of color at an organization, that was a huge deal. So, you know, you just need to figure out who your people are, and that's your people. Like, you know, all skin folk and kinfolk is the saying, and there's only so much you can do. I think someone else asked a question about like, how do you work on changing your coworker's mind, or like, you know, what is the balance? And I don't, unless you're getting paid to do that work, I don't advise you to do it. Like Marley said, it burns you out.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. I mean, you're not going to get evaluate. Like it's hard, right? It's hard to say that. It's hard to hear that because, you know, you want people to be better and to do better. But unfortunately, you were hired to do a job. When you do your course your course evaluation, oh my gosh, when you do your your, I can't even think of the word, when you do your like end of year eval, you know, they're not going to ask you, hey, did you, you know, move your coworkers to be a better human being and to treat others with more respect? Unfortunately, you know, like maybe a decolonized workplace would ask you that, like, you know, how are you, like, what are your interpersonal, like, how have you benefited the company's interpersonal relationships? But I think that there's just, you have to draw the line somewhere. You won't be able to save everyone, unfortunately.
And I think Rachel asked, would you say that creates even more barriers? It, to me, yeah, it's difficult because like I like being the controversial one, and then when I see someone who looks like me, I usually go to them and I'm like, they're with me, so let's be controversial together. And then if they're not down, that yeah, it's challenging. It's challenging. Actually, I'm thinking it's challenging because then the powers that be will be like, but like if your coworker who also looks like you, they're not gonna say that looks like you. If your coworker is not doing this, why are you controversial? But I also don't care. Are you back?
So I can hear everyone now. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. I can't see the chat though, so. But something.
And I want to finish my thought because I had another thought now. And like this whole idea that like people who look like you and like in the workplace, are they your people? I think like the idea of intersectionality also comes into place because we may look the same, but what if we don't have the same background? What if we don't have the same challenges? What if we don't have the same stories? So we all come into the workplace with a different skin, even when we might look the same.
Mm.
And I see another question. Are there conversations about us that we can start with? I would say this is the moment to bring in more Black and brown folks into your workplace. If there's none, this is the time. This is the time. They're listening. So hit me up if you want to talk.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would also identify like, so there's a, I would say like a pyramid of how white supremacy works. And we oftentimes talk only about the top, which is like the most explicit forms of white supremacy, like, you know, KKK, like, you know, explicit crimes where people are being killed. But there's also like less explicit forms of white supremacy that show up in the workplace and values. And, you know, like, I think part of the conversation that we can have is like, how do those show up? Like, why do we value some things over the others? Like, why do we communicate in certain ways? What types of biases do these professionalism standards have? And like, why are we not having a conversation of like how we can do or explore alternatives? And this happens like not only like predominantly white workplaces, it happens in organizing work among people of color, among Black people, among Indigenous people, because like white supremacy is so deeply ingrained in our culture that like we don't see it. It's kind of like the air and like the like if we were fish, we're swimming in it, and it is the dominant culture. So I would encourage like you all to just start that conversation. Like, how does white supremacy show up in my day-to-day life and in my workplace? And like, what values are there that, you know, can be challenged? What alternatives can I explore? Can we explore in order for me to show up in a way that like honors like my own culture? Awesome. And I think we're at time. We're till 4:15, yeah? Yeah, so apologies so much for my technical difficulties. I just want to say, like, if you all want to reach out, please me at .org, and I'll let Gabrielle and Marley share their contact infos if they haven't already.
I don't know where you can get me. I could put my email in the chat, but it's my first and last name at gmail.com. And I think if you look at my Hop-in profile, you could see like my social media. So you could feel free to connect with me there as well.
I was muted. And I'm Marley Pulido Vargas on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you so much, y'all, for joining us. And thank you so much for Marley and Gabrielle for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
See you.
Thanks for organizing.
Bye.